Nitesh, just keep an eye on the participant list, and when Dr. Nazma joins, kindly make her a co-host as well so she can turn on her camera.
Sure.
Should we move to the main webinar?
Yes, Anna, just in like 30 seconds more. Okay, we are going live now. Good evening, everyone. Good evening from India, and good morning, good afternoon to all of you who are joining from the different parts of the globe. My name is Isha Saraswat, and I'll be the session manager for this keynote lecture on countering commercial influence on diets, the experience of Mexico. And before beginning the session, I would like to make few housekeeping announcements that this session is being recorded and will be posted on the IFPRI-POSHAN website. All the participants have been muted for now, but later in the session, we'll open the Q&A discussion. And if time permits, we'll request you to raise your hand so you can ask your question live as well. In case a question similar to you is already in the Q&A box, kindly upvote it to avoid repetition. And at any time during the session, if you face any technical issue, kindly disconnect and rejoin and check your internet settings and audio and video settings. So with that, I would like to introduce the chair for this session, Dr. Purnima Menon. Dr. Menon is a Senior Director of Food and Nutrition Policy at the International Food Policy Research Institute and is based in New Delhi. She's also the Senior Research Fellow in IFPRI's Poverty, Health and Nutrition Division. In her work in India, she has directed POSHAN for over a decade, which is an initiative to support more use of evidence for nutrition in India. Dr. Menon has led teams who conduct implementation research on scaling up maternal and child nutrition interventions in India, Bangladesh, Ethiopia, Haiti, Vietnam, and Nepal, and invests deeply in research translations in her engagement with policy communities. I welcome you, Purnima, and please take the session forward from here.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Isha. I'm really thrilled to be able to host this keynote lecture for the Delivering for Nutrition conference. Today, we've had a very vibrant day of discussions on and presentations from research around the region on what's going on with diets and dietary influences for women and for adolescents. And one thing that has become very clear is the prominence of, or the increasing prominence of ultra-processed foods and other sort of convenience foods in the diets, especially of young people. It's a critical time for the region as we, encounter rising rates of overweight and obesity, high levels and increasing levels of non-communicable diseases, and really just an opportune time to learn from the experiences of other contexts on how to bring together different elements in the policy landscape that affect people's diets. It's a real pleasure to host Dr. Simone Barquera here today with us. I've known Simone for many years now. We were both, in fact, interns at IFPRI with Marie Ruel too many years ago at this point, so I'm not going to go there. But it's been a great pleasure to have followed your work over the many years, Simone, and now to be able to host you to speak to us about some of the insights. In the session today, Simone will give us a lecture on Mexico's experiences of countering commercial influences on diets, and it will be followed by discussant remarks. I will introduce our distinguished panelists who will be discussants later on. But let me just kick off by introducing Simone. So Simone Barquera is an MD with a PhD from Tufts University in Boston. He is a member of the National Academy of Medicine. He has authored hundreds of scientific publications and has participated in the development of policies for the prevention and control of overweight, obesity, and non-communicable diseases. He has received many awards for his work in Mexico, including the 18 Martinson Lectureship from the University of Minnesota, the SOPER Award for Excellence in Health from the Pan American Health Organization, an illustrious alumni award from his alma mater, the Tufts University Nutrition Impact Award, and a merit award from his government, the Dr. Gerardo Varela Public Health Merit Award. He is currently the director of the Center for Research in Nutrition and Health of the Institute of Public Health in Mexico. And he's also president-elect of the World Obesity Federation. If you don't follow him already on social media, you should be. Simone, welcome. Thank you so much for waking up so early in the morning in your time zone. We're really looking forward to hearing from you. So you have about 30 minutes for your lecture, and then we'll have an opportunity to take panelist remarks and then questions and answers. Thank you. Over to you.
Thank you very much, Purnima. It's a real honor for me to participate in Delivering for Nutrition in South Asia, this virtual meeting, and also very happy to be interacting with you after many years. And yes, I'm very happy also to follow your career and see what has been happening in the world during these years in terms of diet. I am going to share my screen. Please let me know if you can see my first slide. Excellent. So yes, I am going to talk to you a little bit about the experience of Mexico in countering commercial influences on diets. Before starting, I want to say that I have no conflicts of interest to declare related to my presentation. And these disclosures are becoming very important when you are dealing with non-communicable chronic diseases and diets, as you will see from my presentation. This is just a picture of the institute in which I work, which is a little bit of a context. This institute is in the south of Mexico City. Purnima has been there. This is a institute that has graduate programs and is part of the government. So we advise the public health policy in the government, but we are not implementing any program. So we are more or less the equivalent to the CDCs in United States. And now let me give you a little bit of context of the background in Latin America. We are basically in the other side of the world. So right now here is 6 a.m. in the morning, and we are a region that is middle income. We are developing more or less steadily during the last decades with a very important transition in terms of demography, epidemiology, and also nutrition. And ultra-processed foods have become very important part of the diet in Latin American countries. We are also one of the regions with the highest consumption of sugary beverages, of soda in the world, and one of the most unequal regions in the world. Even though we are middle-income countries, there is a lot of poverty, and obviously there is also a lot of undernutrition. So we have this coexistence of undernutrition with very high rates of non-communicable chronic disease, so the double burden. And there has been no increase in health investment since the year 2000. The growth in this region has not been great either. And we spend only 6.5% of the regional gross domestic product in health, which is not enough to face the challenge of non-communicable chronic diseases. And Professor Barry Popkin and other scholars have described the main shift in dietary patterns as basically the rising consumption of ultra-processed foods worldwide, with different contributing factors such as technological advances, agricultural revolution, free trade agreements, urbanization, etc. But I will say that of the most important for the region is poor governance and poor regulation of the food environment. So in this region, the marketing strategies are very aggressive and are created by multinational companies, basically without any sort of regulation. And then lacking infrastructure, we need to recognize that also some very necessary components, for example, access to clean water, are not great in this region, particularly not great in Mexico. And in the part of the epidemiologic profile of the country, the highest risk factors are associated, are dietary risk factors. So high fasting plasma glucose, high body mass index, and dietary risks contribute to the highest percentage of disability adjusted life years in my country. But many other of the main risk factors have to do with dietary and lifestyles behaviors. And the main causes of that are diabetes, cardiovascular disease, and other non-communicable diseases. Also, we have child and maternal malnutrition among the 10 main risk factors. So to more or less show you, these are some of the main components of the Mexican epidemic. 80% of the total deaths are due to non-communicable chronic diseases. 130,000 Mexicans die each year from diabetes, and 40,000 deaths are attributable to soda consumption. So it's a very important factor of this problem and of the diets. And we are one of the highest consumers of ultra-processed foods in the world, particularly in the developing world. And we spend more than 6% of our gross national product in health-associated costs. So what has driven us, our diets to this point? In poor rural villages where there are no electronic media, internet, television, you can still see a very aggressive marketing directed to the population, particularly to children, with very colorful billboards and posters and printed material all around the communities. And this is all around the world, in the north, all around the country, in the north, south, etc. And this is one of the main problems that we have been checking, but also in urban areas in the retail sector, it is very common to see aggressive marketing techniques in which the ultra-processed foods are placed in locations in which are seen particularly by kids and in a very attractive way, as you can see in these pictures, and using different techniques such as claims, discounts, product placement for children, the use of cartoon characters that are very attractive to them, also gifts and incentives to to buy more. So these are some of the things that we see in the food environment. And so today we have a food system that favors production and consumption of ultra-processed food, which is sustainable for both human and planetary health. We know that it's not only the damage it causes to our health with non-communicable chronic diseases, but also the way these products are produced, and the plastic that they generate is very important, and is generating a lot of damage. And in the other hand, we have a lot of alternatives, fresh foods, meals, traditional eating, what we call the Mesoamerican traditional diet, that is sustainable, healthy, accessible, and affordable, and that we can produce. We have enough land that is in which is possible to produce this food and have healthy diets. So with this alternative, what we know, and all the experts conclude, is that the obesity and non-communicable disease epidemic won't be solved with isolated intervention, that we require a systems view, complex interventions, multi-sectoral, multidisciplinary interventions. And we agree with that. We recognize that that is necessary. However, for many of the developing countries, it is complex. We don't have sometimes enough evidence, or we don't have the political will, or the resources, or the time to develop these complex systems, comprehensive, multidisciplinary interventions. So we think that focused interventions are a valuable way to start. Sometimes the decision about an intervention depends on resources, or political will, resources, evidence, and very important, it depends on windows of opportunity at the local level. So there is a use for these interventions. They don't solve the problem, but they have impact. They are cost effective and can be helpful. And what is the role of academia? And how can we support the development or implementation of obesity prevention policies? Well, the traditional way is characterizing and identifying causality and determinants, risk factors, mechanisms, and then maybe identifying policy priorities. But there are many other ways in which we have learned that we can help to the implementation, such as advising the civil society organizations on useful narratives to share the view of public health, because these interventions sometimes have small effects at the individual level. But if you learn how to frame this in the population level and how valuable these interventions are at the population level, it becomes easier to explain. Also, we can help to fill gaps against concerns, mostly concerns from other actors, concerns from opposing actors, such as food industry. So it's important to develop this evidence to clear the doubt about the value of these interventions, evidence to support the likelihood of impact. So these modeling studies that with which you can explain decision makers the potential of these efforts. And finally, evaluations, impact studies in which you demonstrate cost effectiveness. So the obesity prevention toolkit that we have identified, and there is plenty of evidence around the world for at least for the 8 policies that are in the upper part in blue: marketing, regulation, fiscal measurements, counseling, front of pack warning labels, regulation on purchase and retail, guidelines, policies for physical activity, school health eating regulations. These are interventions in which there is evidence all around the world. And in Latin America, I will say that we have been successful as the different countries, depending on their resources, interest, and also on their evidence, to implement some of this. In Mexico, we have failed in the breastfeeding promotion and protection. I will say the enforcement of the Codex guidelines. Every year since 4 years ago, we demonstrate that this code is not there is no compliance with this code, but we are not doing enough with the enforcement. We really need to work there. And then we have learned that mechanisms to prevent industry interference is a research line and an intervention that is definitely necessary. So from studying diabetes and mechanisms, right now in our group, many of the researchers are studying industry interference, conflict of interest, and ways to stop and to avoid this interaction in education, research, policy development, and evaluation. And finally, there are these two big ones in which everybody, I think, recognizes that food system transformation and the capacity to monitoring and evaluation food systems is very important, but this is more a long-term goal, and it has the challenge of the change in administrations, the complex coordination, etc. But we know that's the vision to where we want to be if we really want to improve the food environment. And to give you a little idea of where we have been in Mexico, we have two big achievements, I will say, in the obesity prevention policy. One was in 2014, when we implemented taxes on sugary beverages and high-density caloric food, that is junk food. And also in 2020, when we implemented warning labels and banned characters directed to children. That are our two very important policies, and we are very proud of that. But let me tell you that we started working on these policies since the year 2000, when we documented the epidemic of obesity and non-communicable diseases in Mexico. In 2000, we documented a 40% increase in the prevalence of obesity in reproductive age women. And we proposed the soda taxes since the year 2002, when we identified this as an important component of the epidemic. So basically, it took us 12 years to implement the soda taxes. And in the year 2007, we described the importance of front of package labels as a way to improve to help people make better food choices. And it was approved in 2020. So you can see also that it took us 13 years. So these policies have a cycle in which you need to convince a lot of people, health professionals, civil society organizations, politicians, then create the evidence, the consensus, and then finally do these policies, and then maybe evaluate the policies. For example, the warning labels were easier for us to implement because they were previously implemented in Chile. So it was a little bit like a domino effect. And since then, we have other successes, like the approval of a law to ban unhealthy food at schools and around schools. That was in 2022. And also a presidential decree to regulate junk food marketing to children. So this picture reflects what is happening in my country. We have this kind of availability of sugary beverages almost every corner, every block in the streets of urban cities, and also in rural areas. And when we evaluated the soda tax in 2014 and 2015, we reached reductions that are important, about 7.6% reduction in purchases of sugary beverages in the 2 years on average, which is equivalent to 5 liters reduction. And 5 liters probably is not much in a country in which the average consumption is 166 liters. But when you see this in terms of public health, this is equivalent to hundreds of thousands of tons of sugar that we did not consume those years. So it is really important. We never had a policy that was able to achieve this kind of reduction almost immediately after implementation. So it is very important. And after we published these evaluations, soda taxes became available in more than 30 countries. So it created a domino effect in which many other countries started to implement them, even to improve upon the design of Mexico. And so we have now all around the world these kind of policies. And the other one is the warning labels. We use these ugly black octagons, and many people say, no, we prefer the other thing. This is ugly. There are, but that's precisely the point. We want them to be ugly, black, with white, with the universal sign of warning, which is the octagon. This is a traffic sign, and they warn consumers about excess of calories, sugar, sodium, saturated fat, and trans fat. And these 5 warning signs replaced the previous front of pack labeling system that was created by food industry and that nobody understands in Mexico. We made a national survey and we put objective questions about this warning, about this GDA system, and only 3% of the Mexicans were able to prove understanding of it. In addition to these 5 octagons, in Mexico, we implemented 2 precautionary labels, one for caffeine and one for non-caloric sweeteners. And we say these are not recommended in children and you should avoid them. And this was very important. And this was fighted a lot by the food industry, because in Chile, what they did when they started with the warning label on sugar, they just replaced sugar with artificial sweeteners. And we know that they are not safe for children. And there is plenty of information and evidence that probably they are not safe for anybody. And so what we have now is a gradient of warning labels in products of the same class. It has created a massive reformulation of the ultra-processed foods and the junk food, but we always have the fresh option, which is the one we want people to eat. But even if they are going to eat ultra-processed food, they can quickly, if they want, they can choose the one with less warning labels, and they will know that this one is the best option for them. For example, this is the way a can of Coke looks in my country. It has 4 warning labels for excess calories, sugar, for caffeine, and for artificial sweeteners. And we are one of the countries with highest consumption of Coca-Cola, particularly in the world. And now, how did we show the potential impact of this policy to decision makers? Well, we took the impact evaluation of Chile. Chile has published a very interesting set of evaluations of different aspects of the warning labels. And for example, in this article, they show that purchases of high-in, the beverages that have the excess of sugar declined following implementation, and they found that the reductions were larger than those observed from for example from soda taxes in Mexico. So using this information, we estimated in Mexico a potential reduction of 36 calories per day per person, and using this estimation, we expect after 5 years of implementation a reduction of 1.6 kilograms in the average weight of the population, and this is equivalent to a reduction in the distribution of body mass index that will represent a reduction in 1.3 million cases with obesity and savings of about 1.8 billion in direct and indirect costs. So this is a modeling study, but this was very important because we showed this to the Ministry of Health and to decision makers who know that we don't have enough resources to face the epidemic of non-communicable chronic diseases. And we show them, look, these are the potential savings of just putting warning labels. This is not prohibiting anything. It's very easy implementation, and it will be a wonderful effect for us. And obviously the industry responded, and there is a playbook from the tobacco companies that they take almost without any change, no? The 4 Ds: delay, divide, deflect, and deny. So they delay any kind of idea for obesity prevention policies. They say time needed to clarify concerns, or research needed to discuss this policy. We don't have enough. Or they divide. They say there are other systems that are better. Or they say the European Union or the trade organizations are against this policy. Or deflect. They say the impact on employment of an economy is huge. You cannot do this policy because it will affect, or there are violations of intellectual property rights if you stop the characters directed to children, or they say this stigmatizes products and their consumers. And then obviously they deny the causality or the relation. They say, for example, warning labels are not understood, or there is no evidence that marketing to children affects food preferences. So I think a very important role of academia is to help these policies developing evidence to respond to these concerns. So this is not the kind of evidence that you publish in Lancet or in the New England Journal of Medicine, but we have learned that this is very important to have. So from trying to publish cohorts and the impact on of some mechanisms in diabetes, we are now rushing to develop this evidence. For example, in this case, we demonstrated that after the implementation of the soda tax in 2014, in the red line, there were no reductions in employment or in changes in employment in commercial establishments as industry was claiming. And this was very important, and this evidence was later used by other countries to implement their soda taxes. Also, they say more evidence is needed to adequately implement the national policy. So what we did is we started obviously systematic reviews, but also reviews of the experience in different Latin American countries. We organized meetings in which we invited public health officers and researchers from all around Latin America, also from the health agencies like UNICEF, FAO, PAHO, which is our WHO regional office. And we created this evidence that we delivered to the decision makers, and that was very helpful. And also, for example, they were saying there is no proof that cartoon characters affect food choices and that the system is understood. So we developed simple studies to show that when cartoons are in the front of pack, when they are removed, the kids are able to identify unhealthy products in a better way. So this is again a very simple study, but was used as evidence that cartoon characters were guiding choices in kids. Also, they were saying, for example, food products directed to children are safe. So we compare food products directed to children to food products not directed to children. And obviously, we were able to demonstrate that products directed to children have more sugar and more artificial sweeteners. Also, they were saying no country is implementing these kind of initiatives, and these initiatives have failed in other countries. So we developed a program to inform through social media of what is happening in other countries using graphic material, but also citing the sources. And this has become a good way for us to have a relation with civil society organizations and to respond to some of the concerns from industry. And what has been the response from junk food industry? Well, they have developed some strategies to minimize the impact during implementation. So for example, in the right side, you see how the Coke should be placed in retail sites, so you can see the warning labels. And they put it in another way. They put it in an angle that hides the warning labels. And these are some strategies that obviously the new countries are anticipating and developing ways in which they can prevent them. And also they cannot put the cartoon characters anymore in the products, but they are adding gifts in which they put the cartoon character, like in the picture in the left. But in the middle, you can see also the cartoon character is not in the package, but it's inside, it's in the pancake. Or also hiding the warning labels, like this Coke, in which they put instant soup as a gift for purchase. And also many legal actions from multinational junk food industry. Even now, after 3 years of implementation, I was yesterday in the Supreme Court talking with the judges to explain why this policy is useful and the impact that is the massive reformulation of products. And this is happening right now. And I think it's a sign that it is working. Industry is still fighting. They say it doesn't work in one hand, but in the other, they after 3 years, they are still trying to remove it. And to close my presentation, the last part I want to tell you a little bit of what we have been doing as academia very quickly to help homogenize the opinion of health professionals. We think it's very important that the health professionals stay together and support these policies. So we started to work with the World Obesity Federation in 2017 to identify the topics that we thought were priority in Mexico, and with help of UNICEF, FAO, WHO, and civil society organizations, academia, we developed a list, and we started to work with different professionals, training and discuss these policies. In the year 2000, we had a huge World Obesity Day in the 2020. So just before the epidemic, 1 week before the epidemic. And then during the lockdown, we remained working on these policies and created a position paper that had 1,000 authors, 68 authors, main authors, but it was signed by 1,100 physicians and health professionals. It's called Becoming Better, the Need for Immediate Action to Address Obesity. And this is a position in which these professionals make the pledge to not engage with food industry and also identify other actions, 10 actions. All the physicians signed the position, and we have this open for others to sign. So this has created a lot of a common view of what we need to do. And this is very important because when these policies are discussed, you have a very important force of professionals that understand that these public health measures are necessary. And we have been doing this. We did this during the epidemic through social media, and we learned with Zoom, Facebook Live, that we were able to reach even more people. We were impressed of our 2,000 persons, which for Mexico is a lot. But now we are reaching 4,000, 5,000 with our infographies, with our online courses, with Facebook Live presentations. For example, the World Obesity, they have 21 million impressions with our hashtag, We Need to Act. So we have learned that we can do a lot to guide the public opinion. We developed a course on how to understand the warning levels for health professionals with 39,000 participations, and it was free. We did it without resources, thanks to these technologies. And right now, and this is too close, we developed an initiative called NutriCOI, Conflict of Interest in Nutrition. And we have young researchers promoting awareness of conflict of interest for health professionals, developing infographies, and developing this culture of being free of conflict of interest. We are disseminating all our research in infographies in social media. And we are also working with other groups, with environmental groups, trying to promote alliance and trying to help decision makers. And this is how it looks in Latin America. We have this policy toolkit package and many countries working in different initiatives. Some have the leadership in some topics, and we are learning almost in real time from them. And whenever someone has a huge success with something, almost immediately the other countries are catching up and trying to implement that in their own country. So to finish, I will say that collaboration between civil society organizations, academia, political strategy groups, and international organizations is fundamental to advance. Social media is a powerful tool to build shared vision and support the prevention of policies. Young food industry, I will say, is the main barrier for implementation in Mexico. And I can say that after 20 years of efforts, and is basically the main problem also for Latin America, probably one of the main barriers in the world. And advance depends mostly on political will. support, like society support, and windows of opportunity. And these windows many times are when the government is changing and the new government wants to listen, is fresh, and they want to listen ideas of how to improve something. And it's very important to have the information ready for those windows of opportunity. So with this, I will conclude, and I thanks again the invitation to talk with you in this meeting. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Simon. Wow, that was an absolute, just a powerhouse. I have no words for how inspired and inspiring your talk was. I think for me, especially, it was a great reminder of the importance of scientists jumping right in, actually, into understanding politics, into bringing our science to politics, into creating coalitions. And really connecting the dots. I mean, for too long, scientists have sat on the side and have not actually supported activism and advocacy in nutrition. And that's almost a dangerous place to be as a scientist, to just keep an arm's length. I'm going to call on our three panelists now, and let me introduce them one by one. I'd like to invite each of you to also turn on your videos and then come in. So our first panelist is Dr. Stuart Gillespie. Stuart, a dear friend and colleague of many years, is currently a non-residency fellow with the International Food Policy Research Institute and an honorary associate with the Institute for Development Studies, and he's based in the UK. Currently freelancing, he's deeply interested in commercial determinants of malnutrition, has more than 3 decades of experience in nutrition, food systems, and international development. Stuart has worked with many different agencies as well, so he really understands the international architecture of nutrition through his experience with UNICEF, WHO, FAO, WFP. Maybe it's only the World Bank you haven't worked with, Stuart. You have, okay, great. So Stuart has a PhD in human nutrition and also at least a couple hundred publications. What's most exciting now is that he's writing a novel, so we look forward to hearing about that later in another session. Our other panelist is Professor Nazma Shaheen. She's a professor and the former director of the Institute of Nutrition and Food Science at the University of Dhaka, Bangladesh. Dr. Shaheen, welcome. Dr. Shaheen has undergraduate and graduate degrees in biochemistry and molecular biology, including from Japan. She's also trained in epidemiology, biostatistics, and international nutrition, and has postdoctoral research from the National Food Research University in Japan. She has also over 3 decades of teaching and research experience in Bangladesh. I had the great pleasure of meeting her in person in Bangladesh in July, surprisingly for the first time, considering how long we've also been involved there. Dr. Shaheen, thank you so much, both for joining us as a co-host and for being on the panel today. And then last but not least, we have Dr. Lakshmaya from the National Institute of Nutrition in India. Dr. Lakshmaya is currently a director-grade scientist, and he's the head of the Division of Public Health Nutrition at the ICMR National Institute of Nutrition. His academic background is in medicine and public health, and he has extensive experience in carrying out epidemiological, operational, and evaluation research, including anchoring several years ago the National Nutrition Monitoring Board survey. One warm welcome to you as well, Dr. Lakshmaya, and also your much gratitude for NIN's willingness to be a co-host, not just at this Delivering for Nutrition, but the several others that we've had before. So I'm going to ask each of you to maybe offer your reflections on Simon's talk, and you're really welcome to take any angle that you'd like to this. I think there was a lot to react to. So Stuart, let me call on you first. I think you have about 6 or 7 minutes. Yeah, thanks.
Great. Well, thank you very much. I think this is an absolutely crucial session and fantastic presentation from Simon, as expected, and Mexico are really leading the way, and he is also, and his team, leading the way with regard to what academia can and actually should be doing to counter the commercial influence that is disrupting and making the food system that we have around us dysfunctional. I think, so I'm just going to complement what he has said. The perspective is global. It certainly has relevance to India. I know India very well. I've lived there for 5 years. It has relevance for most countries of the world because they're struggling with the same challenges. So when we talk about and when we think about the food system, we need to adopt and use a power lens, I would say. We know that the global system is controlled by a handful of super powerful companies, both on the downstream side, on the retail side, where we see the top 10 countries, top 10 companies controlling 80% of store-bought products with combined profits of over $100 billion a year. We see it on the upstream side in terms of 4 companies actually controlling 3/4 of the market in seeds and agrochemicals. So this is the challenge that we have, and we have to think in terms of power. Power links with money, links with clout in terms of the ability to challenge attempts to regulate these companies. So let's also think of goals. Now, the goals of these companies, as we know, is to make profit. It's not human health or planetary health, it's to make a profit. We know that junk foods, ultra-processed foods, are about 4 times as expensive, 4 times as profitable than other foods. And therefore, you can see why these companies move into these arenas. There are different goals, but there are also different systems of accountability. Companies are accountable to their shareholders who want the financial return. They want them to make this profits like this. Companies privatize the gains, they socialize the costs, and we see the damage of that socializing of the cost in terms of public health, in terms of obesity and all other NCDs that we've been discussing. Governments are accountable to citizens if it's a democracy who put them in power, and they need to act for the public good. So these are 2 different systems of accountability which lead to certain conflicts of interest and big challenges. Simon has talked about various tactics of the industry, the Ds. There are actually more than 4 Ds. I'm particularly interested in policy interference with regard to companies interfering or trying to get to the policy table and interfere with policy. There are various tactics that are employed to do that. We had a great session back in March of this year with UNICEF on policy interference. I'm going to talk about 2 more. And policy interference is really companies attempting to undermine policy and implementation and continue to make profits off the sale of junk foods and harmful products. To do that, they adopt much of what big tobacco used to do. They've adapted that. It goes way beyond lobbying. There are 2 other Ds I want to mention. One is distraction. Companies will distract attention by using corporate social responsibility initiatives. And I often think about left hand, right hand. On the left hand, a company may be doing a small scale boutique project, high profile, very visible, media friendly, and it will showcase the great work it's doing with the left hand. That's small scale CSR, corporate social responsibility. Whereas on the right hand, the harm of the major core business practices continue. And so it uses the left hand to distract attention away from what it is doing, the damage it's doing with its right hand. So that's a distraction technique. We see it within nutrition now, and I've used the term nutri-washing. Nutri-washing is when companies who are, there may be soda companies, Coca-Cola, PepsiCo, and others, who are generating obesity, and they will pledge for hunger campaigns. Zero Hunger, there was a campaign which went through the UN Food System Summit, and PepsiCo were a big donor to this campaign for undernutrition. And again, this is another form of kind of like greenwashing, sports washing. It's just showing, it's engaging and it's distracting attention away from the big issues. Second D, another D is disguise. We see companies disguised by being associated with, if you like, front organizations. These are networks which have many members, and they're very influential. They're always around at conferences, but World Business Council Sustainable Development have PepsiCo, have Nestle, have Philip Morris as their members. They're actively involved in shaping discussions around conferences, and they certainly were very much involved in the UN Food Systems Summit. I won't go into detail on that particular conference. A lot has been discussed and written about that. It may not have been corporate capture, but it was certainly significant corporate infiltration in that particular conference. Now, to turn on to the positive side in terms of what do we do about it, and Simon has clearly shown what he is doing and what others are doing in Mexico, and that's having an impact, and that's great to see. We need to use both carrots and sticks, and in many ways the sticks are what the governments really need to be thinking about, because that is what is having an impact, and that's regulation through policies and through taxing on junk food, laws on front of pack labeling, advertising, ingredients, to hold companies to account for the harms that they're causing and to change the direction. That requires political will to do that. Panima and I and others 10 years ago wrote a paper for The Lancet that looked at the political will to address malnutrition. It's something that needs to be built. Political will is a political choice to do something or not to do something, and we need to remember that. We need to steer governments in the right direction by shining a light into the black box of the political economy to show what can be done and where are the windows of opportunity. Governments, civil society need to shine a light, continue to shine a light on the harmful practices of companies, hold governments to account, and help to generate awareness among the public of the harms that have been caused by the junk food industry, and also shareholders to back out or to step away from these companies or to demand that they change. Academia, big role. Simon has already talked about all the work that he is doing and others are learning from. Industry uses a corporate playbook. We need to have an advocacy playbook. And then I realized today that there is one. UNICEF have just brought out Shifting the Narrative, an advocacy playbook for shifting the narrative around prevention of child obesity, which is great. We need to have more stories of change, positive stories on lived experience as well. For the United Nations, it should remember, and international organizations should remember that a lot of them are based on human rights principles. And a lot of them are based on the do no harm principle. That was absent, completely absent from the UN Food Systems Summit. It wasn't one of their principles at all, and there's obviously a good reason for that. Private sector needs to respond to these signals and produce food that is affordable and healthy. And just know, I think we're all a bit tired of pledges and promises and even commitments when there is not enough clear transparency and accountability. We need actions and not words. We need the talk and not the walk. And I just want to finish with reminding you of what Jeff Sachs said in the UN Food Systems Summit. He said the best public-private partnership that we know of, that we have evidence that works, is taxation. And the private companies should remember to pay their taxes, follow the rules, and that's what they should be doing. So thanks anyway for the opportunity to be part of this session.
Yeah, great. Thank you so much, Stuart. Sorry, my time was a begging here. Dr. Nazma Shaheen, why don't you come in, your experiences and perspectives on this particular issue from Bangladesh. I know many countries in South Asia are beginning the walk towards, warning labels and these types of legislation. There's a lot for us to learn from the context of Latin America. It would be great to hear from you.
Thank you. Thank you for a nice presentation, Dr. Simon. It's a great opportunity for me to listen so valuable and informative keynote presentation. Congratulate to the Dr. Simon. I have to give some thanks that you can impose the tax for sugary drinks, because in last 10 years in Bangladesh, we are trying to convince the government and policymakers to impose the tax on the sugary drinks to reduce the consumption, especially the children's. The children's drinks a lot of fruit juice, which is not actually the fruit juice. Those are the color and sugar materials, and which affects the children health. But we cannot. But in Mexico, you can take impose the tax on sugary drinks. And Bangladesh, like the other third world country, we also rapidly shifting our dietary habits, and a lot of processed foods are coming into the food chains and ultra processed foods. So Bangladesh, we are also in a double burden of malnutrition. We are facing undernutrition at the same time, the overnutrition, that is overweight and obesity, which cause the non-communicable diseases. And in Bangladesh, almost 67% death is due to the heart disease. But there is no such policy that you have for the prevention of the obesity. Nowadays, in Bangladesh, the professionals are talking about that there should be separate policy for the NCDs. But still, we don't have any other separate policy for the control of the prevention of the NCDs. We have some studies with National Heart Foundation so for trans fat, because WHO have the declaration that by 2023 there will be trans fat should be regulated up to 2% of total fat. So we analyzed all partially hydrogenated oil available in the produced in Bangladesh and available in the market, and we identified the 92% PHO contain trans fat, which is more than the WHO recommended level. So on the basis of this study, we proposed government and especially the Food Safety Authority to do the regulation. So the regulation is already amendment in the parliament, and it will be effective from 31st December of this year. Now, one technical committee with Food Safety Authority, they are working to make the roadmap how to implement this regulation, trans fat removal regulation, because some of the confectionery and the bakery item needs the partially hydrogenated oil for its texture and taste. So we cannot ignore their need and their business. So now one technical committee is working with the producer and the technical experts how to implement this regulation in Bangladesh with the experience from the other countries like India, Bangkok. This is the one step we are already can do the regulation of removal of the trans fat from or maintain the level in processed food. And one survey we did, and we identified a lot of processed food, not only the urban area, in rural village, there is the lot of processed food is consuming people's nowadays. And from that, those processed food, we identified the 40 key foods which are frequently consumed. And we analyzed those 40 foods for a specific nutrient. for approximate to calculate the energy, trans fat, saturated fat, salt, and sugar. And we compared these analytical values with the labeling of the packets. And none of the product among the 40 satisfied the real amount with the labeling. So the labeling is the huge problem still in Bangladesh. They are not following the labeling. Those nutrient which is required, that is over-reporting, and those nutrient is should be restricted, say for salt, sugar, saturated fat, that is under-reporting. And we assessment, we did the assessment of this 40 processed food by UK traffic light system, and also by health star claim system rating, and we identified none of them are in traffic light system there is yellow, green, and amber color, and none of the product is the green color. So all either red or amber color. Maybe in some nutrient it is green color, but the whole profile is not green. And so none of the product cannot satisfy the healthiness of the. So now we are trying to push the government for the traffic light labeling. And I saw that you have in Mexico, you have some front pack labeling, and you use the cartoon for the children, which one is the healthy, and I think it is very interesting, and we can take this experience to use in Bangladesh. And there is another interesting thing I came
Dr.
to
Shaheen,
know.
could I ask you to wrap up, please?
Yes.
Thank you.
That is the social media used for the that is awareness build among the civil society, because it's a big challenge to come together, the government, civil society, professional, academia, and industry together, and to convince the industry to make the healthy product, because they are always think about their business. They are not thinking about the health of the consumers. So that is the big challenge. And you already concluded, and previous panelists also mentioned that the political determination is the most important thing to convince and come to the same platform for healthy diet. So thank you very much. Thank you, organizer, to invite me as a panelist and co-host for this conference. Thank you very
so much, Dr. Shaheen. Dr. Lakshmaya, over to you, and then hopefully we should have another about 20 minutes for some responses from Simone, and also to take some additional audience questions. Dr. Lakshmaya.
Just good evening, everyone, and thank you for giving this opportunity for the organizers. And very excellent talk done by Professor Simon. So he narrated everything, almost even what are the almost all determinants and what are the policies to be done, and fortunately those policies are working. So here in case of India, because this is a developing countries and even underdeveloped countries, we have a peculiar situation. We have undernutrition is a problem, as well as micronutrient deficiency is also a problem. Then and overweight, obesity, non-communicable diseases also a problem. So we cannot have a only single dietary guidelines to all the population, because we have to this approach. We have to take a different approach for three categories of population. So in India, because we have done several studies for what is the extent of processed and not processed food, even urban area and tribal area. In 2014, I think Purnima may be knowing. So in that, because we said that we thought that in India it is a lot of rural population, 70%, and the processed food consumption may be less. But shockingly, the processed food consumption. So almost 17% population daily consuming one or the other processed and ultra processed food in urban area. And whereas in rural area, it is almost 7 to 8% people are daily consuming. But so the quantity may be varies, but at least one or the other items they are consuming. And as you know, the epidemic proportion of increase of non-communicable disease we have seen, and we are and the government and even FSSA also working towards healthy diet and Eat Right India movement, and even NETCOSAN, NIN, and several organizations also working on that. We are also working on recently we are also started one project on trans-free India, and we are estimating in India trans fat levels in all the 6 regions of India, and that project is going on. And even as even previous speaker said that even the cardiovascular mortality and NCD mortality is very high in India also, as well as I seen in other developed countries. So the problem is, because we know the problem and we know the determinants, and but how to intervene and what are the interventions can work. So now several interventions also simultaneously started. But here the multi-sectoral approach is very important, because one sector cannot do the justice and it will not work, because government initiatives also there, and even public partnership, public-private partnership, and agencies, NGOs, and academia, and research organizations, and as well as even FSSA and other organizations also should work and should work together. So then only it can be achieved, because you said several increase of tax and other things, but if this taxes increased for tobacco and alcohol, but the consumption levels never decreased. So in spite of increasing tax, the consumption levels as it is going on, even tobacco and alcohol consumption in India. So the tax alone may not work in India like countries, because even the behavioral change, communication, and the knowledge and the behavior change and practice is also very important. And the third point is availability of healthy food. So that is also more important, because we are almost second in production of vegetables and fruits globally, but unfortunately the storing facilities are not adequate. These are perishable items, because the loss is very, very high, the product vegetables and this thing. And in consumption pattern, if you see the consumption pattern, the fruits and vegetable consumption is very less. Only the adequate consumption is only 8 to 10% of people are consuming adequate consumption, that around 400 grams per day per person. So that is also the consumption levels also we have to increase. And recently, even we have done another study. What is the contribution of food alone for the overweight obesity? And shockingly, and we have done some principal component analysis, and we have seen that almost 54% of contribution to increase the overweight obesity just food alone. So apart from other contributory factors, so the food is so important. And now, because the nutrition transition and epidemiological transition, demographic transition also leading to this high epidemic increase of NCDC. So my point is also we have to all a multi-stakeholder approach, and there should be there several intervention programs, even national program also initiated, and several districts also now the screen and treat is going on for hypertension, diabetes, and in most of the districts in India. So the convergence is very important to control, and even the WHO framework. So the reduction, there are several goals fixed in WHO framework, and we have to comply. India also one of the signatory to reduce these are the risk factors. So now government is coming with several intervention strategies, and the more and more districts also involved in spreading this national control of cardiovascular and mental diseases. So the dietary availability and affordability of diet, and another, instead of increasing the taxes for the high salt and high sugar and fat, and decrease and subsidy should be given for healthy food, and the healthy food availability may be increased in everywhere in nook and corner of the city. So thank you for giving this opportunity.
Thank you so much, Dr. Lakshmaya, Dr. Shaheen, and Dr. Gillespie. I thought each of you spoke to a range of different issues that both the global community in nutrition, but also sort of local and national communities in nutrition need to pay attention to. We do have a few questions in the Q&A box, but Simon, I'm wondering if I can, turn it to you to see if you have any reactions to, what you've heard from the three panelists. And then in the meantime, I'm going to take a look at the questions and begin to share some audience questions here.
Sure. Well, just small comments. I think we share a lot of the challenges in developing countries, even though we are in different regions. And I think there is a great opportunity, because we're in different transition moments, to take advantage of the experience of Latin America. And I also see some behaviors, positive behaviors that are in place in Asia that you should protect. So I don't know, the culture of sugary beverages in Latin America is something that probably, if we don't drink tea, for example, I think drinking tea without sugar is something that needs to be like fomented and protected as a way to have healthy hydration. So these kind of things. And so yes, I think it's important to try to link the experience of transitions and try to see what are the things that can be prevented. And then from what Stuart mentioned, yes, it's amazing how the playbook is the same as in tobacco. I am very envious that in English all the components of this playbook start with a D, because when we want to communicate this in Spanish, then it breaks and you don't have the Ds, you have a lot of different things. But yes, we need to be equally strong to have the advocacy playbook and maybe the health professionals playbook, because it's important to have the health professionals together and not allow this division that food industry always do, to have different opinions in the professional sector. I've seen, for example, in Mexico, there is now a movement to for the human right to clinical nutrition. Human right, and it doesn't make sense to me, like, to clinical nutrition, but why? We have the human right to health. And then when you see the position paper, it is sponsored by these companies like Nestle and these companies that sell this product. So I think it's very important that these movements from the academia are clean from these influences. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Simon. So, we have, let me ask a couple of questions that are in the from the audience. So there's one that's very specific about the academic community, and I think I'm going to ask that one because all 5 of us sitting around the table, virtual table here, are members of that academic and research community. So the question is really, what do you think the academic community in countries like India, and I'm going to extrapolate that to South Asia, can do to jumpstart action where obesity is on the rise, but the country is still focused predominantly on undernutrition? And so the narrative stays in its nascent phase on unhealthy foods. Now, I think Mexico was probably also there, maybe, 10 years ago, certainly during your, tenure at the Institute. So I was wondering if you could reflect on that. And then maybe Stuart, if you could also reflect on that from a global perspective. And then I have a couple other questions that I'll come back to Dr. Lakshmi and Dr. Nazma as well with.
Yes, well, what I see is that when we started in the year 2000, we had like this trend that came obviously from developed countries of trying to solve the problem with fat. We were thinking, well, this probably has to do with fat in foods. So we were very concerned about fats and trans fats and reducing the amount of fats in diet and recommending people to cut fat, but very little attention to ultra processed foods and to sugar consumption until very late. And then 10 years after we were trying to do these obesity prevention policies and we started to talk about sugar, it was to start from zero. So start with demonstrations in reviews of the damage of high consumption of sugar into the diet. So one thing that I think you could save is all this time, because there is so much evidence. It's not even now a discussion, the high amounts of sugar in diets. And then in this double burden, there needs to be some solutions that are okay for both. And those is like the less ultra processed foods and traditional diets, less critical ingredients in diet. So I think some of these recommendations can be in place since now and will be effective for both problems.
Thank you so much. Stuart, any thoughts from you from the sort of the global nutrition research community perspective?
It's a great question. I just remember 20 years ago, I think we were involved in an initiative on the double burden of malnutrition in Asia. Around that time, Barry Popkin was active as part of our team, and he was focused a lot on the situation in China. At that time, there's more of a threat, I think, with regard to Asia, at least we perceived it as such, and obviously it's a different reality now. But in terms of academia and jumpstarting and a focus on overweight and obesity, I think the 3 areas. One is to work on the harms with regard to overnutrition or overweight and obesity, to work on the connections between under and over, and this is a double burden, and we know that the double burden exists. It overlaps, undernutrition overlaps in time and space with overnutrition, if you like. There are shared drivers, there are shared causes, and there are shared responses, actually. And if we can, in academia, work on those, on the harms, on the connections, and on the responses. So in the responses to monitor and evaluate attempts to address the double burden, that's a crucial role for academia, obviously. And to learn from others and to maybe connect others. So look for ways of sharing experience across national boundaries. I don't know how that could be done. There are many ways of connecting. And developing a community of practice and a community of inquiry around this area, around the double burden.
Great, thank you. Dr. Shaheen, let me ask you a question about Codex, and maybe, Simon, you have some responses to that as well. So there's a question here from Atul Upadhyay who says, enforcing Codex documents at a national level is quite challenging. However, what I have felt is developing Codex standards against the influence of developed countries and multinational companies is even more challenging. So what would your suggestions be to low and middle income countries while developing codex standards to prevent this kind of influence and interference? So this really speaks to the role of corporate interference as one of the strategies and in the context of codex. So not sure, Dr. Shaheen, if you had any codex experience, but if you can speak to that.
Yes, in Bangladesh Food Safety, BSTI, Bangladesh Institute of Testing and Standard Setting, they are doing the standard setting according to the codex, to implementation codex, and we follow the codex, and academia also giving the input in the setup in codex, and whether the BSTI, when they set up a standard, whether they follow the codex or not. So the academia is the performing role there. But the problem is that BSTI is the authority for standard setting, and they are also involved in the monitoring. Where is the conflict of interest? So after that, when we do the after policy on food safety, that is Safe Food Law 2013, we propose the Food Safety Authority. The Food Safety Authority, like the FDA, which will be works independently. So then there will be no conflict of interest about the standard setting and the monitoring. But our plan and our ambition, still we cannot get reflection from the government side. Food Safety Authority is working there, but there is some overlapping. So there is not clear demarcation line that who will set up the standard and who will do the monitoring. And so still we are struggling in this area. So the which regulatory body will took the initiative and will monitor the whether the codex is implementing properly or not.
Great, thank you so much for that. I think obviously clear lines are just so critically important to draw here. They just can't be shifting, they can't be dotted, they need to be very, very clear. Simon, any reflections from you on the codex issue?
I think this is one of the hardest problems to solve. I have some ideas of why, but not. I don't think I understand everything. But I think one of the points is that it is affecting just a smaller number of people. So it's like it's only with lactating kids, and it has a very strong relation with the medical profession, with the pediatricians, and with very high incentives. And it's a very high profitable industry. Like they earn millions of dollars in Mexico. So I think the investment in breast milk substitutes in Mexico is higher than investment in many other ultra processed foods, and we have tried everything, but what we think is necessary is definitely like something like plain package, like generalized package of the formulas, and regulation to stop relations with health centers and with professionals. And this is going to be really hard. It will face opposition, but this will be something very necessary to stop this relation that is not good for nutrition.
Great, thank you. So let me ask the last question. Sure, Dr.
Dr.
Lakshmi,
Purnima.
please, you want to come in on the codex? Yeah.
Yeah, Dr. Purnima, even this Codex and Food Safety Authority of India and NIN, we are also discussing several guidelines and limitations and especially trans fats. So we are working on that. So probably, so that because a lot of even guidelines we are adopting, and we are revising even codex also. Codex because internationally same limits and levels also we are fixing. So
Great.
that way we can use we are helping in codex, and codex also some of the guidelines we are adopting from codex.
Yeah, thank you, Dr. Lakshmi. I think the key question here is, who are the people around the table when the codex is, when these guidelines are made, and how can we limit the influence of industry in the development of some of these guidelines? There is a point at which, certain actors whose interest is more in private profit making rather than in the public good perhaps shouldn't be at a decision-making table when decisions are being made about the public good. I don't think any of us is disputing the importance of the food industry. I mean, most people in this world are buying food from the markets. I think the only concerns here are about the influence of industry on critical decisions that governments make. I'm going to ask the last question, and maybe all five of you can come in on that before we close. Someone asks, how can we shift the belief that sustainable diets are more expensive? And I think it sort of hits to the heart of why perhaps, some of the tactics, but also the positioning of and the development of food products by the ultra-processed food products has been so, influential in terms of shaping people's diets, is that it's sort of hitting that combination of affordability, convenience, taste, time. And, that's something that, unfortunately, I think we have not really been able to crack that magic combination from a public health and, sustainable diets or healthy diets perspective. So maybe each of you could offer just a minute or so of closing thoughts that reflect on this, this intersection and the idea of affordability in the context of, in the potential for us to create change. And then I'll take this session to a close so that we stay on time. So maybe why don't we start with you, Stuart, and then Dr. Lakshmi, Dr. Shaheen, and Simon, you can have the last word.
Just a brief reflection. I mean, I think the reason that UPFs, ultra-processed foods, are 4 times more profitable is there's a reason for that. It's based on the history of the way the industry is skewed in terms of subsidies, in terms of protection of harmful practices by companies, and we need to work on that and to change the incentives structure to generate the power and the incentive for changing the cost, the affordability of healthy diets, and alongside that would be sustainability. So I think it's addressing some of the root causes of the situation that we have at the moment and starting to reverse that or change those.
Dr. Lakshmi, short reflection from you on the issue of affordability and intersection of time, convenience, and other things there.
No comments.
No comments. Okay. Dr. Shaheen?
Recently, we did the one study to affordability of the healthy diets. And according to the food-based dietary guideline, we costing the healthy diet. And this study is just before COVID, and 43% of the household cannot afford the healthy diet. So affordability is the huge issue if the healthy diet make the sustainability. And the choices, the food choices, the food industry spend a lot of money for aggressive advertisement. So we have the one study for the pregnant mother. So what the healthy food they are taking during their pregnancy, and we identified they prefer Horlicks, Tang, and noodles. These are the healthy diet for pregnancy. So this is the reflection of the aggressive advertisement to influence the consumer the consumer has no awareness about the which one is the healthy diet. Most of the people don't know the definition of healthy diet and how healthy diet, which component can make the healthy diet and which nutrient should be restricted. So that is the another problem, the awareness, nutrition education is the important thing. Thank you.
Great, thank you, Dr. Shaheen. Simon, last word on this sort of intersection of affordability and other determinants to you.
Thank you, Purnima. I think this is a very important area, prices of food. And I agree that food industries try to convince us that eating healthy is very expensive. And I don't think that's the case, at least in Mexico. And even like when you go to expensive supermarkets, with what you can buy, like a 3-liter soda, you can buy lots of fruits and vegetables. So it doesn't really apply. Other factors, as you were mentioning, preparation, practicality, and other, probably, yes, we need to think more. But in terms of prices, not that much. There is a protocol from Informas, this network, international network to evaluate the food environment, and they have 11 protocols, and one is on food prices, and is free to download from the internet. And we started to work with this protocol in Mexico, and we developed with the national survey models of thousands of diets, and then we analyzed the cost of the diets in Mexico, and then we compare that to a healthy diet, and then to the Eat Lancet diet model. And what we found is that the current diet in Mexico is more expensive than a sustainable and healthy diet using, for example, the Lancet recommendations. So, and we created with these infographics, and we are showing this to the health professionals and to the public and to the civil society organizations to empower them and to make them to assure them that if you remove the ultra-processed foods, with these savings, the increase in investment in fruits and vegetables is compensated, and you still are expending a less amount of resources. Obviously, there are other issues, and I understand this, and this needs also to be well thought. But in terms of prices, in most regions of Mexico, I think we can say that is less expensive to have a healthier diet.
Great, wonderful to hear that, because that's often, not the kind of insights that we get. Well, I want to thank all 4 of you for joining us today. Simon, your talk was deeply enlightening, but I think really also deeply inspiring to all of us. We have many questions, including how some of the research that needs to be done is going to get funded and supported and actually done. This is a big area. It's also a big area where, of course, the industry exerts its influence on scientists. But we are deeply appreciative that you took the time out to join us today to prepare this talk. And I hope that this is only just the beginning of what I think needs to be a serious South-South conversation between Latin America and South Asia, and of course with our colleagues in Africa as well, about how we can come together to really tackle the commercial determinants of malnutrition, all forms of malnutrition, and really learn from each other. So I hope that you'll remain connected with our efforts as we look forward. Dr. Shaheen, Dr. Lakshmaya, and Stuart, thank you so much for your incredible perspectives from Dr. Shaheen and Dr. Lakshmaya from, 2 high population, but also high burden of all forms of malnutrition countries in the region, and Stuart, your perspectives on, the global nutrition community. We remain, committed to continuing to create these connections between and among all of us, and to work together with all of you to take this very, very important agenda forward. Thank you all again so much. And that really brings us to a wrap of day 1 of Delivering for Nutrition. To everyone here in the region, please join us again tomorrow for the 2nd full day of the conference. Thank you all again.
Thank you.
Thank you all.
Thank you very much. Bye-bye.
Thank you.